Do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years?
Too many.
Okay, now 5 is a lot, right? I'm gonna give you some credit. Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years?
Counting or not counting gang violence?
Great.
I want to watch that execution. That'll make my day better. I want to see him on a public block and get him be publicly executed. And I think that would be justice. At what age should you start to see public executions? But hold on a second. Don't you agree that more speech, not less speech, is better for a free society? Prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people. That's a fact.
Now let's get it all in perspective. For all y'all enjoyment, a song y'all can step with. Y'all appointed me to bring rap justice, but I ain't 5-0, y'all know it's not, yo. Grey Goose and a whole lot of hydro. Only describe us as soldier survivors. Stay laced in the best, well dressed with finesse in the white tee, looking for white meat.
So if you had a daughter and she was 10 and she got raped, when she was gonna give birth and she was gonna live, would you want her to go through that and carry her rapist baby?
The answer is yes, the baby would be delivered.
In the days after the death of George Floyd, conservatives created the George Floyd Challenge on social media, where they took pictures of themselves mocking Floyd's last moments before his death.
And you won't swing around like you stupid. King of the town, yeah, I've been that. You know I click clack where you and your men's at. Through the Smurf, through the wop baseball bat. Rooftop like we bringing 88 back. They shooting.
On April 20th, 1999, I was in my junior year of high school in math class in the middle of what seemingly was a normal day. And my teacher, whose name I don't quite remember, came into class late with a ghostly look on his face. He was a first year teacher, one of the few black male teachers I think I had all through high school. He was from Colorado, so he had a bit of a Carlton Bank swag, very proper. But he settled us down and then announced that there had been a shooting at a high school in Colorado and that our school, way in Illinois, might be dismissed soon. I didn't go to a school where I worried about safety that much. This is the South Chicago suburbs in the 90s, and don't get me wrong, gang violence was definitely a thing, even in the suburbs back then. But in my school, at worst, there were a few fights. I might have seen some gang activity once or twice. So it was weird to all of us that this shooting was significant enough in a whole state across the country that they were gonna cancel school here, or that anything about our school in particular would need to change in the aftermath of the Columbine massacre.
Eerie sight to see so many sort of scenes from an everyday school event. You see kids walking around in gym attire. You see students still working out with their weight belts on, and you see a lot of tears. But the most striking vision here at the school is parents searching around frantically for their children.
Now, understand, gang issues have been relevant to the city of Chicago for decades. I wasn't even allowed to wear a certain color combination since like 5th grade because even in the suburbs, the gang problem was serious enough for them to pay attention. I had to learn a handshake or two to walk through my neighborhood just to get to school for a short period of time. But I didn't know any serious gangsters, right? I wasn't in the streets like that. And the streets that you would have to be in like that were not near me. But I do vividly remember stories of Yummy Sandifer, Dantrell Davis, and Girl X, horrifying stories of crime in Chicago in the 90s, but far enough away that I didn't think about it in my daily life. At the same time, it did reflect enough of my world that I understood that I was still somewhat a part of it. But I didn't fear it at school. My high school was pretty decent. It was well mixed at the time, both racially and socioeconomically. There was a handful of rougher kids from the city who went to school, but that was it. I worried more about getting roasted at the lunch table than getting chased home by GDs. But after Columbine, I suddenly had a new fear that I needed to face every day. Random, quiet, edgy white boys. Well, not super random, because one thing that came out of Columbine was that there was a certain type of young white male that was almost always behind these types of events, and they were more common at my school than any alleged thugs. See, much like the black parts feeding into the school, there were also poor white parts, and I noticed early on that the poor white kids at the school did not mix well with the ones from the nicer part of the suburbs. In fact, they were bullied incessantly by those kids, and some of those kids fit the description, if you will. They seemed frustrated with the world in ways that didn't make sense to me, because to me, they were still white, couldn't be that bad, right? Over the years, I found most of these guys on Facebook, and most of them, I would say, are living useful, healthy lives. Most of them actually have moderate to liberal politics at the end of the day. But a few of them still seem very, very angry. But these days, I kind of get it. Young men like Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, the perpetrators of the Columbine massacre, they, for whatever reason, felt very similar to these boys and men, and they just decided to respond in destructive and horrifying ways. And of course, you know, they weren't the first or the last.
Students also say that members of the small suburban gang bragged about their guns and ammo. One cyber chatter even recalled a previous warning that a certain El Caress wrote about preparing for the big April 20th. You're all gonna be sorry. Terrorism experts widely know that this time of year has been extremely violent throughout history. April 19th is the anniversary of many painful moments, from Waco to Ruby Ridge to Oklahoma City. And this past April 20th was the 110th anniversary of Adolf Hitler's birthday.
April 20th might just turn out to be a watershed date for an event such as what occurred in Colorado, and might in the future precipitate other types of events like this.
In 1999, Columbine was actually the fourth school shooting to get significant media coverage in around 4 years. A few years before, Kip Kinkle shot 20 students a day after murdering both his parents in Oregon. In that same year, 2 middle school students set up a sniper's nest and pulled the fire alarm at Westside Middle School in Arkansas, killing a teacher and 4 middle schoolers. Sometime later, there was another shooting in Georgia, or maybe it was back in Colorado, maybe it was Illinois. Fast forward some years, and it's a guy driving a car through a college in California. It's hard to say. There's so many, and to be honest, I personally stopped counting them the way I did back in 2012 in Newton, Connecticut, because that's when I realized that no matter what happened or how many people died, nothing was ever going to be done about this problem. In 2012, Adam Lanza used a Bushmaster XM15 to kill 27 people, 7 adults and 20 elementary school age children. You would think that such an event would elicit national outrage strong enough to change gun laws in this country forever. That's what happened in other places where mass shootings occur. You'd think that this nation would do some deep reflection on its engagement with guns, mental illness, and the ways young men, mostly white young men, are being socialized to make sure that something this senseless would never happen again. Surely someone would pay a price for the death of nearly 30 innocent people, mostly innocent children, innocent, mostly white children. But no, instead, it actually birthed a new conspiracy movement. People like Alex Jones made harassing the families of the victims their new content formula, so much so that he was sued into relative obscurity. And once that happened, it became clear nothing would ever be done about these types of spree shootings, because it's more important to serve the interests of gun lobbyists and the ideology that represents it than to serve the people suffering from the gun violence themselves. Because to them, to white America especially, it's worth it.
I think it's worth it to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights.
A source tells CNN that Trump ally and the founder of Turning Points USA, Charlie Kirk, was shot at an event on a college campus in Utah.
Kirk was actually shot in the neck. The school adding that Kirk was 20 minutes into speaking
when shots were fired from a nearby building. According to the university, there are reports that Kirk was hit.
We can hear the audio where an audience member asked Kirk about mass shooters in America right before the gunshot. And the audience member says, "Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America over the last 10 years? Kirk says, "Counting or not counting gang violence," and that is when that single shot was fired.
It is my great dishonor to be the person that says this and breaks this to you on television, but Charlie Kirk, according to the President of the United States, is dead.
When I look at the very public, gruesome murder of Charlie Kirk, I can't help but realize that for the first time since 2012, I'm reminded of this brand of spectacle violence, somewhere between terrorism, true crime, political violence, and accelerationism. But, and here's an important part, almost always exclusively white, both in the victims, but also the perpetrators. It's actually not ideal to talk openly about the perpetrators of mass shootings. I'm gonna break some social mores in this video, among many other things. The reason why I call it spectacle violence is because for the most part, the individuals that do these horrific acts do them for attention. It's why they write manifestos and send press kits to local media. Some have even live streamed their crimes. So talking about them publicly ends up being exactly what they want, and in many ways, it motivates copycats. However, at a certain point, I feel like certain conversations need to be had, especially when some of the main people who need to hear these things are trying very hard to avoid the subject. The underlying forces behind these events, behind the murder of Charlie Kirk and even the attempted murder of Donald Trump, are things the right deeply wants to avoid, because talking about these things might force many on the right to critically engage with the ongoing struggle that the right is in with its own ideology and the tangible results that ideology leads to, which, to put simply, is rampant unnecessary death. And by rampant unnecessary death, I'm not just talking about the multiple genocides happening across the world through American imperialism, or the many preventable deaths happening because of poor healthcare or poverty in America right now. I'm genuinely just talking about normal white people that are dying or killing themselves greatly due to the ideology that the right promotes throughout this country. I believe many modern conservatives, particularly the men, are in a death cult. It's not a hot take to speak to how the party of Trump thrives on the pain and suffering of others, but today for this video, I want to spend time on the real byproduct of that. The fact that the biggest body counts, at least here in the States, is actually other white people, and that the cult works extremely hard, often using figures like Charlie Kirk to hide this reality, or maybe make it seem like it's all worth it, as we see them do with his death in particular. I had no desire or intention to talk about Kirk because I try my best to avoid these types of headaches. But in the wake of his death, the right has tried to turn him into Martin Luther King, and Charlie Kirk directly insulted Martin Luther King's legacy.
Yeah, and the Civil Rights Act, though, let's be clear, created a beast, and that beast has now turned into an anti-white weapon.
Yeah, and that's the reality.
So there's a need for some direct pushback and response in this regard. Also, I have to admit, I'm a bit fearful of the response this might get from the right. They seem to feel like this one time, nobody should disagree with their views of this guy or make fun of the fact that he died, that nobody should make jokes about a person who was overtly hateful and ugly to them. Mind you that in the days after the death of George Floyd, conservatives created the George Floyd Challenge on social media, where they took pictures of themselves mocking Floyd's last moments before his death. And to this day, they are so obsessed with mocking him that they're still keeping him alive through memes and AI. But somehow, Charlie Kirk is where we draw the line. So you guys got that one, sure. With that said, I will forewarn you, this is going to be a pretty gruesome, ugly, hard to watch video at times. I'm going to talk candidly and maybe even flippantly about death and self-harm and mental illness and mass murder and all the isms. While I have some hopeful things to speak to by the end, this is definitely a video that will make you feel shitty at times, because it made me feel shitty making it. But it needs to be done. It needs to be known years from now, when we finally are out of this situation, that many people saw this nonsense for what it was, and will hopefully be there to inform those who don't know any better just who Charlie Kirk was and the greater context in which he lived. Because these ugly times won't last forever, and historical record is needed lest we carelessly repeat avoidable mistakes. So let's talk about Charlie Kirk and the cult that killed him. Part 1. The origins of the culture war.
The American family, liberty, freedom, the Constitution, our history, veterans. That's what we're conserving. You are on the precipice of the most important culture war. Young men do not know how to control themselves. Ladies, would you agree? Oh, don't worry. I'm going to do the whole other side of this in a second, so you better be ready. You better be ready. They're like, oh, yeah. It's going to be an equal opportunity offender.
To understand Charlie Kirk in totality, we first need to understand that he isn't the first, nor will he be the last of his kind. In fact, he's part of a long-standing tradition of right-wing provocateurs whose job is not doing politics the right way, as some dumb asshole might say on their podcast. But instead, he was furthering a far-right agenda in this country. And this is apparent in just how far the right has been able to shift the Overton window in terms of what are even acceptable things to say or believe in our modern society. For example, no American would have supported or even seriously engaged with the idea of a president getting a third term ever since FDR did it nearly 75 years ago. It's literally in the Constitution. However, for weeks now, as of recording, Republicans, even Republican officials, have been seriously priming Americans for the argument that Trump should get a third term and how that's actually okay under the Constitution.
We had longer odds in 16 and longer odds in 24 than we got in 28. And President Trump will be the president of the United States, and the country needs him to be president.
Or is it constitutional for President Trump to run for a third term? He's teasing that.
If you read the Constitution, it says it's not, but if he says he has some different circumstances that might be able to go around the Constitution, but that's up to him. We got a long way to go.
But you're open to it.
Well, I think that there's going to have to be an evaluation.
Not even George W. Bush, who was very, very bad. The fact that he's the last Republican president before Trump has managed to whitewash his past. He was not good. Don't let the old painting sad man stuff fool you. But as bad as he was, he never would have thought of sending troops in the military and the National Guard to American cities and states that he didn't like. But Trump is threatening to send American troops to low-crime cities like Portland, stating that they need to be cleaned up, ignoring the much more dangerous cities in red states. And the right eats this all up. Mind you, and this will be a recurring theme, none of this is really helping anyone, let alone many of the working-class white people who voted for Trump. While Trump's appeal is more diverse than people like to believe, this is just something you have to acknowledge. At the end of the day, his base, like all Republicans for years, has been among uneducated whites and rural white people. People who, for the most part, have never benefited from his policies. For example, regarding the ongoing government shutdown that is still in place as of writing, the shutdown is happening because Republicans want to make major cuts to many social safety net programs, which will impact poorer Americans. And despite the efforts of Republicans for decades to make it seem like the poor are only undeserving black and brown people leeching off the government, the majority of Americans receiving those benefits are white. And these same white people will support Trump literally to their death. Why is this the case? And what does it have to do with Charlie Kirk? To make sense of that, I want to dive into the concept of the culture war, because it's through the culture war that all of this is possible. And they know this because Charlie Kirk actually named his college tour the Culture War Tour. So switching gears for a second, if you're at all on Twitter and social media in the months and weeks preceding the murder of Charlie Kirk, you probably caught wind of two other tragic killings. The killings of Austin Metcalf and Irina Zarutska both went viral on Twitter, as these were two young white lives ended by black men. Both of those black men, mind you, faced immediate legal charges. I want to be clear. It's genuinely sad, and I send condolences to their families regardless of the circumstances of their death. It's tragic when people die like this, especially when their deaths have become flashpoints in culture wars online. Austin Metcalf's father in particular showed an inspirational level of grace in the aftermath of his son's death that should be commended. Unfortunately, that father's grace is not being copied by the American right, who used his son's death to talk about black fatigue. Not the original use of that term, by the way, but a racist version that is basically white people getting tired of not being able to be openly racist. Similarly, Zarutska's death spurred legislative initiatives to reinstate and even expedite the death penalty in North Carolina, which, yikes, is really all I can say to that. And this is all after President Trump weaponized the deaths of white women at the hands of immigrants all through his campaign trail as a way to bolster his anti-immigrant agenda. And now we have ICE kidnapping people off the street and even in churches, gyms, and public schools.
I want you to take a look at something that just came about 2 days ago. We made a tape, which I'm going to show you, and it's a tape of a great mother who I got to know a little bit at one of the rallies.
Night accused of killing a 12-year-old girl.
Police say these men strangled her before dumping her into that creek. Both men were in the country illegally.
There are hundreds and even thousands of cases like that, and it's people coming into this country that are horrible people.
And as I saw these stories explode online and invigorate an already foaming at the mouth population of racist conservatives, I couldn't help but think to myself, but what about white on white crime? What about Vincent Bolletaro, the young Charlie Kirk fan who murdered 2 teenage girls whom he had been stalking for what seemed like months, even after getting a restraining order against him? By the way, Bolletaro's family is connected to law enforcement, but clearly they're very picky about who they need to protect and serve. Or what about insert countless other stories of white women murdered by white men since the beginning of time? Gabby Petito, Lacey Peterson, Natalie Holloway, the little girl that John Benet Ramsey. I've been seeing that girl's face since I was a child. It's actually cursed. Surely other young white women have been murdered in North Carolina. Were their deaths not worthy of attempting to reinstate the death penalty? What is it about DeCarlos Brown, the severely mentally ill black man that killed Ariana, that warrants such a response? Do you think that black men are the most pressing danger to white women in this country? If you do, it's probably because you're racist and low-key sexist, but I know I only have so much room with y'all right now. You can bet money, like literally, don't make this bet because you'll lose it, that if a young white woman is murdered in North Carolina, it will probably be from her white boyfriend or husband. Because all crime in this country is intraracial. At least 80% of white victims of violent crime, the perpetrator of that violence is also white. White people make up 74% of familial violence victims, meaning child abuse, domestic violence, and familicide, which makes sense because most family violence offenders are white. And females make up 80% of the victims for family violence, again, usually killed by a boyfriend or husband, very rarely a stranger. And considering that only around 10% of black men have a white spouse, the biggest threat to any white woman in this country by far is a straight white man. And that goes not just for murder, but also assault and especially rape and molestation. Yet somehow new laws form when a black man is the perpetrator, as if it's the right of white men to abuse, harm, and kill women that look like them. And it doesn't require new laws for putting convicts to death when they do it. And don't get me wrong, the rate of intimate partner violence in the black community is awful in so many ways, but don't all lives matter, y'all? Surely we shouldn't only focus on black people in this situation, not if what we actually care about are these innocent white lives. And isn't this kind of gross? Is this what y'all watch me for? Some of y'all, that's what y'all want out of me. Ugh, I hate it. I hate y'all so much. Sure, when you go low, going lower is a thing, but at the end of the day, bringing up white crime statistics in this way should just really make you feel icky. It's too much like the stuff they do. You know, further, it's not like any racist in the audience will suddenly be convinced to rethink their ways based on this information. And I'll come back to this in a moment, but this is not how actual minds are changed in reality. If racism or any other ism were an issue of logic and information, would have solved that issue years ago. But it's very clear after literal generations of learning and educating that no amount of explaining the truth to racists changes the way they see things. Racism's power to endure for so long in this country isn't due to hate. I hate that we talk about racism as an issue of hate because that allows for so many people, so many very racist people, to create distance from themselves and the actual damage they do with their racism because they don't necessarily feel hatred in their hearts when they do it, and they're probably correct. Racism isn't about hate. It's about indifference to harm being done to people that don't look like you, especially if that harm is useful for how you maintain your own status quo. Racism is still here because it has utility as an organizing social framework for white Americans. The role racism plays in this country is for building consensus in community. It's almost ritualistic in its use.
I am a Western chauvinist. And I refuse to apologize. I refuse to apologize for creating the modern world.
White youth for a generation have made racist jokes, not as an expression of hate, but almost as an initiation into whiteness as a concept, performing the agreement amongst each other that blackness is beneath them and unworthy of sanctity. This is why racist group chats exist so prominently, such as the one the Young Republicans got caught on earlier this year. This is why white kids on Omegle and other chat random sites and Call of Duty lobbies hurl slurs from the safety of their perceived anonymity, going all the way back to slavery slavery. This is why poor whites had astoundingly low standards of living, but fought for the Confederacy because it preserved their way of life, as wretched as that way of life was. The lynchings of black people during slavery going into Jim Crow was often a community gathering or festival environment for white people. They would make flyers and sell food as they watched black bodies burn and hang from the poplar trees. Then afterwards, some would even take their body parts as souvenirs. Feel free to Google this. I am not making this up. The biggest falsehood about racism is that it's about the hatred of any group of people. But in reality, racism is about a perverse love for whiteness and the love language through which that is expressed. And this is just the overt stuff that whites will admit you shouldn't do. We shouldn't lynch people. We shouldn't say the N-word. They keep doing it and saying it's a joke, but they know they shouldn't. And the reason why that is still such a focus because it serves as the cover for the much more harmful systemic racism that most whites, including Charlie Kirk, would never even admit exists.
There is nothing fascistic about deporting people in your country that are here illegally, securing your borders, and putting your own people first. How many of you students out there feel as if you'd be graded differently if you come out as a conservative or a Trump supporter? Raise your hand. Look around. That's fascism. That is definitional fascism.
Do you think, for all that I just said, do you think a few cherry-picked statistics and some witty clapbacks is going to change this? No. This is the culture wars.
And busy schedule to meet with us, the grassroots. We're fighting on college campuses every single day. We're fighting for the next generation. And to know that we have the backing of the most successful president of our generation means the world. Because look, we are in a culture war right now. We're fighting for free speech, for free markets, and for American exceptionalism. And to have the president take time out of his schedule to meet with us, to just exchange some ideas really, really means the world. And look, this is a battle that we're going to win.
And beyond that, we spoke about the black community and black issues.
I can't stress enough how important culture wars are to the American right and to American politics in general. And this is because culture wars have effectively replaced actual politics for most people, right and left. But specifically for the right, it has been instrumental in convincing many people to vote against their best interests. When regular people are surveyed about policies, they almost always lean toward more progressive policies, more taxing the rich, less government in people's personal lives, sensible gun control laws, etc. It's not universal. Many Americans support tougher border laws, for example, but very few desire to see what's actually been happening under Trump since he's been elected. Even attitudes on abortion rights consistently fall to the left of Republican policies. Conservative voters constantly vote against their self-interest, whether they realize it or not. And even in moments where they do realize it, they still don't care because, as I've been saying, this is a cult and the culture wars are their, deep lore text. The culture wars, ironically, are proof that facts actually should care about feelings because people have been using feelings to override facts in this country for 100+ years. There's so many examples of this, both historical and recent. One is that conservatives were more likely to die from COVID due to vaccine hesitancy and resistance to masking. Despite the fact that science, logic, and so much information was telling them that masking and vaccines would save their lives, so many conservatives were literally, I remember vividly, I'll see if I can find the clip, a guy that was on a respirator talking about how he doesn't regret not getting a vaccine or masking, and then he died 2 days later.
I immediately asked Christopher, why hadn't he gotten the vaccine?
I'm more of a libertarian, and I don't like being told what I have to do. I'm still not completely 100% sold on the inoculation.
It was eerie to hear Christopher insist on his individual freedoms, even as he struggled to breathe.
You think I probably should have had a little healthier fear that it need to be taken more seriously? And because I don't know how close I am to being a lot worse. I really don't know.
Christopher Green died 9 days after this interview. He was 53 years old.
It doesn't take much to find countless examples of conservatives directly being hurt by Trump's policies on tariffs or ICE crackdowns, people's mail order brides being deported. And it's often people who voted for him. And whether or not they regret it is up for grabs. But understand, Pointing this out about Trump is low-hanging fruit because it's been everyone since the beginning of time in this country, especially when it comes to conservative ideology. For example, consider free healthcare, something that the rest of the developed world has had for more than half a century, and it should and would be here in America if not for the utilization of culture wars. Numerous American presidents from a variety of political standpoints, going back to the early 1900s, have tried to create a universal healthcare system that was free to Americans, but were stymied by capitalistic and conservative entities using emotionally manipulative culture war methods of convincing the masses that having free healthcare was somehow not in their best interest.
President Truman was reelected largely on a campaign for a single-payer national health plan, and the Democratic Party gained control of Congress. At the same time, Americans were on edge after World War II, and a lot of that fear was placed broadly on the construct of communism. This fear towards communism and communists, which infested the world through the Cold War, became known as the Red Scare. Opponents of the WMD healthcare bill took advantage of these fears to squander its success. The AMA was one of these opponents, and with help from public relations firm Whitaker and Baxter, launched one of the largest lobbying efforts of its time. The group spent over $4.5 million, $48 million in today's dollars, on advertisements, newspapers, magazines, letters, and radio stations across the country. Slogans played on communist fears with titles such as "A Threat to Health" and "A Threat to Freedom," and utilized the term socialized medicine whenever possible. Public opinion in support of government health insurance fell from 74% in 1942 to 51% by 1949, just a year after President Truman was voted into office.
The same thing happened with the New Deal back in the 1930s. Was the New Deal the 1930s? Am I tripping? Don't make fun of me. Yeah, okay. The New Deal was at its core a socialist work program that lifted millions of Americans into the middle class out of poverty. But it only passed because it was initially designed to exclude undeserving Black Americans as much as possible. However, after political wins for Black people, such as the Civil Rights Bill, fair housing laws, etc., this required New Deal government programs to be more accessible to all Americans. And you see white Americans quickly turn against the very policies that induced the golden age of American prosperity in the 1950s and 60s. Even today, the very idea that people should get free healthcare is somehow controversial and un-American, even as millions of white Americans suffer and go broke due to healthcare costs. A fun fact to never forget is that white people poured cement into their own swimming pools to ensure that Black people could not swim with them. Conservative political positions are positions to maintain systems of dominance and exclusion, even if those most dominated and excluded are white people, all cloaked in the rhetoric of personal responsibility. Charlie Kirk himself railed against the idea that the government might offer free lunches to school children, claiming that the problem with school children was obesity and not food insecurity.
Do you think that there should be free school lunch for all children?
No.
Why?
Of course not. Because parents should feed their kids, not the government.
What if they can't?
Go get a job. Show me a single child in America going hungry. Doesn't exist. Number two, we have churches, we have food shelters, we have billions, and it does not exist. We have a child obesity problem, not a child starvation problem in this country.
Refusing to recognize that those problems are connected and that there's tons of evidence that literally millions of American children need free lunches and that it would be incredibly beneficial to those children and thus society as a whole to get them. In this clip, Kirk yells, "Get a job," and the crowd laughs because they still operate on the image of Black welfare queens, not realizing that the average recipient of food stamps is a single white woman with 2 kids. Mind you, the woman originally used to demonize the concept of welfare and called the welfare queen was a white woman.
Her name was Linda Taylor, and she was identified by the Chicago Tribune in 1974 as a person who had committed welfare fraud while driving fancy cars, including a Cadillac. And very quickly after that, she was given the nickname the Welfare Queen.
It is accurate to say that a higher percentage of black children suffer from food insecurity in this country, something like 20 to 30% of black children, or around 2.3 million kids. And white children suffer from food insecurity at a much lower rate, somewhere around 7%, but we live in a predominantly white country. So that 7% adds up to close to 4 million white children whose parents need to get a job, so the rest of us don't have to pay a few extra dollars on our taxes to help their children not starve and not grow up being statistically more likely to end up dead or in jail. Ironically, paying for school lunches up front means paying less for jails, healthcare, and welfare later in their lives. But because of people like Charlie Kirk, many conservatives would rather those 4 million children starve if it means those who are undeserving suffer. Even now, as the government is preparing to shut down, conservatives are mocking people who won't be able to feed themselves. But here's the real power of this cult, of the culture war. Some of these same people doing the mocking were themselves once on SNAP benefits. Some of these same poor white moms of those 4 million kids are still likely going to vote Republican in 2028. And I want to correct the common sentiment from progressives that says it's because they're dumb. They're not dumb. Delusional maybe, but they just fully believe in the worldview they've been sold. And this begs the question, why and how? These decisions actively make America worse for everyone, not just black people or gay people or immigrants, everyone. And most of the people who suffer are white. And many of those suffering also support their own suffering. Why and how? To answer that is super complex, and I don't know all of it, but I know a big factor that brings us back to Charlie Kirk is his role in the culture wars and his job of recruitment and reinforcing of the moral standards of the right by using those culture wars to galvanize and build consensus with their base. And this is most prominent through the media. Today, that is YouTube and podcasts, but for a while, it was TV and radio. And that's where the foundation lies, in media manipulation. And to understand that, you have to start with good old Satan himself, Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666. This man is undefeated in how often something bad comes back to him. In this situation, it's the 1987 ending of a policy called the Fairness Doctrine. You may have heard right-wing pundits at times try to make this seem like this doctrine would silence them and make it so they wouldn't be able to have the right to be on air, but that's not really accurate. The end result probably would change the way that all politics are discussed in media. But what the Fairness Doctrine really was making media companies more responsible for the type of topics they covered on air. Essentially, you couldn't have something like Fox News before the 1980s, and the same could be said for MSNBC, because the Fairness Doctrine basically said that if you have opinions of a political or controversial nature, you have to have both sides of that opinion. And they have to be presented in an earnest and direct manner, unless you could legit get fined by the FCC. Thus, it was hard to use media to exclusively promote any political agenda. There was political discourse in media before then, but it was much more measured and straightforward, more educational, and far less entertaining. Hence the many TV broadcast interviews of political figures, even radical ones like a Malcolm X. With the Fairness Doctrine gone, our politics became another framework for just being entertainment, just as subject to media manipulation and sensationalism in the name of ratings and marketing versus education and seeking the truth. Today, our political media looks more like something from Monday Night Football or professional wrestling, and entire networks of channels can push explicit and clear political agendas. And now there are large groups of Americans who only get their news from overtly biased sources. And no, this video is not sponsored by Ground News, but it is sponsored by Nebula. We can talk about that real quick. If you're enjoying this video analyzing white culture and conservatives thus far, you might also appreciate the short mini doc I did on Nebula called Talking to White People, which was greatly an influence for this video. Talking to White People has me actually sitting down and having conversations with white people about what it means to be white and how we kind of never talk about this, and also the reasons why we never talk about this. And ideally, this won't be the end of me examining this topic, but only if you support my streaming service, Nebula. Nebula is an independent streaming service created by YouTubers like myself, where we can have a place for creators to work the way we want to work and make the types of content we want to make without the persistent pressures that YouTube puts upon us. If you know anything about Nebula, then you know that we've had some of the most talented and forward-thinking creators around. And because we have so much talent on our roster, we have been expanding to say, what if we give this talent the resources to go bigger and better than what they thought possible? Along with my short film Talking to White People, you also have full documentaries from Tom Nicholas, where he examines how the baby boomer generation is affecting the world. There's also short films from Jesse Gender and Philosophy Tube, reality shows featuring a bevy of creators, travel shows, even narrative podcasts, as well as a ton of content from legendary creators like Lindsay Ellis and Jacob Geller and Real Life Lore that can't be found anywhere else. It can only be found on Nebula. Nebula is owned by creators and funded directly through you, the viewer. We don't have any big tech dollars propping us up that we have to answer to, and we want to keep it that way so that we can continue to make the exact thing that we want to make and to be as weird and out there as we can. And to do that, we rely on your support. So to help us on this evolution, please click the link in the description or follow the QR code on the screen to sign up for a full year of Nebula for 40% off.
And right now, for a limited time, new subs to Nebula get 3 days of a free trial to test and see if there's anything inside Nebula that you really want to see. And you won't be charged until the 4th day, and you'll get an email reminding you in case you want to cancel. I dare you to give it a try. I doubt that within 3 days, you'll have seen everything you want to see.
You'll be supporting the growth, not just of my channel, but of creators like me to continue to go beyond the limitations of YouTube and modern media as a whole. Ground news shade notwithstanding, the point is that having a balanced intake on what political opinions you bring in pretty much started to die at that point. And then it got even worse because of one more thing. Reagan isn't the only villain here. You all know I'm bipartisan in my hatred of America's political apparatus. The next major factor is the Telecommunications Act signed by Bill Clinton in 1996.
Today, with the stroke of a pen, our laws will catch up with our future. We will help to create an open marketplace where competition and innovation can move as quick as light. An industry that is already 1/6 of our entire economy will thrive. It will create opportunity, many more high-wage jobs, and better lives for all Americans.
Among many other things, what this mainly did was allow for unchecked corporate ownership of media companies, resulting in massive mergers until only a few companies own all of what is seen or heard on our screens and airwaves. So now you have companies like the far-right leading Sinclair Media owning most local TV stations in the country and purposely seeding right-wing perspectives into their coverage and being blatantly manipulative in their efforts to control media narratives, as seen in this horrifying but real clip of their many news stations reading the same script.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these things simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
So with these two things in place, we now have the environment set for people like a Charlie Kirk to wield immense power in pushing cultural narratives and swaying public and political influence. They just didn't quite know it yet. And Kirk comes in the late 2010s, but he's following in a tradition of right-wing talking heads, normalizing certain far-right talking points. And here's where we meet the most important character in the history of the culture wars and possibly one of the most influential political figures to never hold an office, Rush Limbaugh.
Folks, there's actually a debate going on ESPN and throughout the sports world over who can use the N-word, when, and how. The white race has probably had fewer slaves and for a briefer period of time than any other in the history of the world.
What are the similarities between the Democrat Party of today and the Nazi Party?
Rush Limbaugh is greatly responsible for today's political reality. There is no Trump, no Fox News, probably no Manosphere, and definitely not a modern culture war without him. He is patient zero for the awful timeline we're in right now. Ironically, Limbaugh was the failed son of a prominent political family whose only talent was yapping at a time where that talent only had one medium to be successful, which was radio. And Limbaugh loved radio and worked in it on and off growing up until he got to college. And then he dropped out of college to focus on being a DJ full time in his early 20s and was not very successful until he found his calling as a right-wing provocateur. And this wasn't a new thing for American radio at the time, but to give the devil his due, Limbaugh was extremely talented as an orator.
Barney admitting that he had an affair with Stephen Goby, and he said, quote, "I was just trying to help this guy through some problems, but I got suckered. That's what drove me to My Boy Lollipop. My Boy Lollipop." Perfect. It was absolutely perfect. I don't think that is making fun of the homosexual lifestyle.
Because of the Fairness Doctrine and the Telecommunications Act, the value of his voice skyrocketed and spread throughout the nation. In his book, Talk Radio is America, How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Took Over the United States, Brian Rosenwald explains how, with the Fairness Doctrine gone, radio stations learned to streamline their content for market optimization, making all-day conservative talk shows a strong branding strategy, partially due to the fact that newer FM radio was clearer and better for music, but couldn't reach as far as AM radio, and listeners were fine listening to lower quality signals for talk radio, meaning that it was rural Americans well outside of city centers that was their key market demographic, playing into certain conservative and regressive ideologies around people and social issues, etc., was great for galvanizing that community. And this coincided with the aforementioned rise in media consolidation, as well as the vision of people like Newt Gingrich, who recognized where politics would fail, culture wars could prevail. And so what we have is our first ever basically algorithmic bubble, where a whole community of people are cocooned in a specific view of the world without ever being exposed to opposite opinions, and then enriched and radicalized and having everything about that reality turned up to 10 to the point where we are today. We're at a point now where Charlie Kirk is saying things that Limbaugh would have been taken off of air for in the 90s.
Taylor Swift might de-radicalize herself, engage in reality more, and get outside of the abstract clouds. Reject feminism. Submit to your husband, Taylor.
Again, the point is always to push the envelope on what can be deemed normal and civil, and that's what these people have been and are continuing to do. Republican politicians courted Limbaugh's favor. He makes visits to the White House, he advises presidents, and he gets more and more influential. Mind you, in this same time, both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton served 8-year terms. So he isn't all powerful in terms of actual sentiment for most Americans, which is something that's important to remember, but I'll come back to that later. But the nature of our politics is fundamentally altered in terms of polarization and what counts as a political platform. Instead of actually talking about policies on helping American people with jobs and healthcare and the economy and even safety, it just becomes, are trans people playing sports with your children? Are gay people kissing each other? Are black people existing? The most effective commercial, and this has been proven in the previous American cycle, was this commercial about Kamala Harris talking about trans people, using the slogan, Kamala is for they, them, Trump is for you.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
That is a proven thing that worked more than anything else that the Republicans put out there. That should tell you something about the power of the culture wars. Mind you, there was also liberal and progressive media and content doing the same thing. Jon Stewart rises during this same time, as does NPR. Liberals even tried to mimic talk radio with the failed Air America, but it was not good enough to shift the Overton window with this significant amount of Americans who, if we're honest, liberals weren't paying attention to. The country as a whole didn't seem to realize what was happening in middle America this entire time. A lot of especially modern liberals don't recognize is that Obama and Bill Clinton moved the Democrats to the right. Yes, they did. Stop arguing me about this bullshit. Look it up yourselves. Do the fucking Googles. And Clinton specifically pushed the Democrats right in a way that gave Republicans two options. Either move left, which was out the question, or move further right, which is what they did with the help of Limbaugh. They vilified everything the Democrats did, even if the Democrats were doing exactly what the Republicans wanted to do, such as the 94 crime bill or the welfare reform bill, both under Bill Clinton, or Obamacare, which got its origins from Mitt Romney's healthcare plan. What Limbaugh and the culture wars did was make it that even working with Democrats to make the government functional and help a small amount of people was seen as a heinous betrayal to the conservative reality and ideology. He helped create the image of Democrats as godless communists who hate America, and that impact reverberates through conservative spaces and leadership to this day. In that process, Hillary Clinton became a supervillain even before she ever held any type of office. So when she ran in 2016, unbeknownst to many liberals in the Democratic Party, she was fighting essentially 20 years of negative campaigning to millions of Americans. The blue wall had cracks in it for decades and nobody noticed. And let's be clear here. It wasn't hard to make the Clintons look bad in middle America. The Democrats had long since abandoned the working class in favor of neoliberalism. They serve the same corporate overlords that the Republicans do. They participate in the same behavior that exploits and harms American people. They just do it with nicer words and a more diverse cast. Please understand that Democrats had their own culture war strategy of paying lip service to racial minorities, immigrants, and the LGBTQ community, but never doing enough to actually help them outside of grand gestures and empty promises. Even today, whenever we see figures in the Democratic Party that are more progressive and are more trying to get away from corporately owned politics, people like Bernie Sanders, Jamal Bowman, and Zohran Mamdani, the Democrats prefer establishment figures owned by corporations instead and do everything they can to undermine those movements, which is why Democrats constantly lose.
Down for you. For you.
Meanwhile, NAFTA, started under Reagan but signed by Clinton, expedites the mass erosion of jobs in middle America. And this leads to poverty and dysfunction in those areas that turn into hotbeds for opioids and meth and heroin in white populations. And then here's Rush Limbaugh and his cohorts such as Sean Hannity, Michael Medved, Herman Cain, etc., explaining that their problems, the problems of these white people in these rural towns in middle America and in the South, those problems that they're experiencing are the result of the Clintons, the Obamas, immigrants, critical race theory, and eventually trans kids playing soccer, the woke mind virus, and postmodern neo-Marxism. And it's worked beautifully for well over a decade now. And so Trump won in 2016 and liberals were shocked and did it again in 2024. But don't mistake this for the country moving more right. It's just the country responding to its natural right-wing disposition. It's because the right is winning the culture wars. It is clearly apparent that the right isn't doing much to create new ways for Americans to thrive and be successful. No one believes in trickle-down economics and probably never have. Republicans haven't been the party of small government since Dwight Eisenhower. But they know policies don't matter as long as they promise to hurt the people that their followers hate. And in that regard, they're doing an amazing job. And this is the role Charlie Kirk really played. He wasn't God, family, country, all that shit. He was meant to be a provocateur, but not to galvanize the masses, but to collect those already interested in the rhetoric that the right presents and radicalize them into devoted followers who will support the right no matter what, no matter if it's actually hurting them. What conservatives require are cult members. They require people who are more interested in winning the culture war than their own well-being. People immune to facts and logic. This will come up later, but understand the modern right isn't this huge, overbearing mass of people. What it is a well-organized, highly motivated mass that can in unison move and influence everything about our political reality. I talked about it in my election results video that Trump had hundreds of thousands of votes in swing states where voters didn't even bother to vote for any other candidates or issues on their ballots. These voters weren't politically inclined or informed. They just came to vote for Trump as a part of his cult of personality. That's what the right has understood for decades now. It's what they learned from Limbaugh and why even today, as they get exposed for all kinds of corruptions, openly court Trump to defy the Constitution or get caught having racist group chats, they never apologize, never admit wrong, never play defense, because their most valued followers don't want that and don't need that from them. Never forget Trump saying, "Stand back and stand by," when asked to denounce white supremacists. That wasn't an accident or a misspeak, that is intentional. A small group of highly dedicated, well-organized, and mobilized believers is all they need under the circumstances because those folks do the work. They do the evangelizing. They do the recruiting and they come out to vote, which is really all they need when the Democrats are as weak and feckless and genocidal as they are. And thus, America has steadily moved further right in pretty much every meaningful way for most of my lifetime. Sure, gay people can get married for now. You might even see a gay kiss on TV every once in a while. For now. And there were some DEI workshops and some donations to black schools or whatever after George Floyd was murdered. But never forget that after a year of protests and riots in the name of George Floyd, all these people shouting defund the police, that the government's response was to raise police budgets nationwide. This country is as right as it's ever been, Policing hasn't changed. The rich continue to get richer as the poor get poorer. Corporations own our data, our ways of communicating with each other, and even our access to art. The country is still hella segregated. Women no longer have the right to abortion. There's still no free healthcare. You can still buy AR-15 the same place you can buy Pokemon cards. Military police are invading American cities and kidnapping people off the street, and America is still an imperious superpower supporting and funding numerous genocides across the globe. Aside from a few victories here and there and some dynamic changes, the right has been winning the political game via the culture wars for a while now. This doesn't mean we stop fighting. In fact, we're in a better position than we've been in decades on the opposite end of the spectrum. But let's not be delusional on where the ledger stands. All that said, something else occurred to me when I saw Charlie Kirk get shot in the neck and the ensuing aftermath, and that maybe winning the culture war isn't the goal here, because the winners of the culture war seem more like losers. Part 2, who was Charlie Kirk? I barely knew who Charlie Kirk was before he died.
Do you truly, in your heart of hearts, truly believe that this is a human being? This,
Without a doubt.
without a doubt,
Yes.
this is a dolphin fetus. This is a human fetus. Look how similar they look. In life, do you confuse dolphins for human babies often?
Regular watchers will know I don't engage in rage bait content much. For all the accusations I get of catering to white liberals, this is my first conservatives are bad video in like 3 years, because I don't like attracting those types of viewers. I don't watch or listen to conservative pundits. I don't make content about the ridiculous things they say or do. I legit could barely tell the difference between him and Tucker Carlson, because they all fit in the same mold that I just described earlier. However, they're trying to make him into a martyr. They're trying to make him on the same line as Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, to lionize him as a sympathetic figure who only wanted what was best for people in America and had deep, meaningful beliefs about free speech and open dialogue and getting past differences. God, family, country, in that order. And to the untrained ear who doesn't know the reality, who could hate that? But I know that Charlie Kirk started out by targeting people for free speech, by targeting college professors and trying to silence them on college campuses for saying anything that was in any way progressive. I know that these same people who say God, family, country will gladly persecute you for not worshiping their God, kill your family, and put you out the country. Of many things I'm gonna expose about Kirk, the main thing that should tell you the type of person he is that he's the only conservative pundit that I can think of in my lifetime to legitimately and publicly criticize Martin Luther King in any real way.
When the New York riots happen, it goes for like a
condemn
week.
them,
It goes
right?
for about a week. He's telling King, you've got to say something to condemn this. And King says he doesn't want to do it because he says, I don't want to deliver a condemnation without also condemning the causes that lead to riots.
That sounds like
you can't
BLM. I wanted to make sure that, after that conversation, we talk about the positives. And then we also get into some of the other implications of this. We're a truth-seeking show. But I can say declaratively, this guy is not worthy of a national holiday. He is not worthy of godlike status. In fact, I think it's really harmful.
Most conservatives aren't bold enough to engage with MLK critically. Instead, they like to use the sanitized version of King to push their right-wing agenda. But maybe, I guess to his credit, Kirk has purposely brought up King's radicalism as a way to undermine him, likely in preparation for Project 2025 and the purging of civil rights that we see they're clearly trying to attempt. Notice how Kirk talks about the civil rights bill and his issues with it. He doesn't get very specific, does he?
Imagine what happened during 2020 with even more murdering, and just remember how angry we got when CNN called it mostly peaceful.
Exactly.
And this is one of the reasons why MLK's numbers went down towards the end of his life.
This is one of the reasons why MLK's numbers went down towards the end of his life.
He doesn't spell out the problem. He just insinuates that a problem is there, and he expects everyone else watching to know where he wants to go, but he can't quite go there yet publicly.
The Civil Rights Act was a new founding where we decided to discard the U.S. Constitution and reconstitute the story, the mantra, the creed, and the vision of America. And you even see this in Republican circles as well. Well, they say, the Civil Rights Act corrected a lot of the errors of the Constitution. No, it didn't. The Civil Rights Act was a completely new creation. Of course, it was well intended by some. We have acknowledged that many times. But the Civil Rights Act at its core was a new founding. It was to discard what happened prior. The Constitution says people have equal rights. Imagine just treating people equally. The Civil Rights Act does not treat people equally because the legal theory under the Civil Rights Act is disparate impact. And so therefore you can't arrest a bunch of criminals in DC because you might be disproportionately arresting black men, and that might be deemed as racist.
And this is a very intentional thing that Kirk and folks like him do. They're always just asking questions or having a conversation. And I bring this up because the first thing that people need to get on board with is recognizing that Kirk's whole shtick of open dialogue and debate is a bait and switch tactic, not meant to actually pursue truth and a better understanding of modern issues, but to normalize certain ideas, spread them as much as possible, and then harness the power that comes from that. There was once a time that agreeing that your 10-year-old daughter would have to have a baby by her rapist was considered weird, but here's Charlie Kirk doing it for millions of viewers to see.
So if you had a daughter and she was 10 and she got raped and she was going to give birth and she would and she was going to give birth and she was going to live, would you want her to go through that and carry her baby?
That's awfully graphic.
But it's a real life scenario that happens to many people.
The answer is yes, the baby would be delivered.
And then he just continues on as he is, as if that's not the worst thing you've heard today. And it's because Charlie Kirk's fans either don't notice or don't care. But being wrong and weird on a large scale for everyone to see is the point. Kirk and his ilk aren't trying to convert normal people or those who disagree. He's seeking out the select few who are amenable to his extreme beliefs or indifferent to them as long as it serves their overall agenda. This is also why he focused on the least capable opponents for making content. While Kirk is presented as this great intellect or debater,
in life, you confuse dolphins for human babies often?
Most of his debates and his debate wins come from debating 19-year-olds using well-rehearsed talking points and skills of sophistry to make his fundamentally awful opinion seem reasonable and possibly even logical. Much like people like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder before him, he recognized that arguing with college kids was an excellent formula for churning out content for the right-wing media apparatus.
9 out of 13 states had abolished slavery by the Constitution. Northwest Ordinance had all new territories were free.
And what do you take from that? That America wasn't racist?
Not only that, we were the first country to abolish slavery, not just continue the practice of it.
Charlie, you have to understand, you're not an unintelligent person. You know that that's a logical fallacy.
Why?
The right has for decades targeted college campuses as college kids make for easy targets of derision. Colleges are where young people go through many transitions and develop unrefined belief systems that they paradoxically feel incredibly strong about, making them easy targets for gotcha moments and very satisfying to see put in their place. Thus, they are great for farming content to the anti-intellectual crowd. And that's often what happened in these viral moments on right-wing online spaces. Remember, Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, these are adults with entire teams behind them who do this for a living, challenging some 19-year-old who probably stayed up till 2 a.m. the night before playing Call of Duty that took maybe 1 or 2 sociology classes and wants to step up to the table. It's not a fair fight. It's the equivalent to watching Razor Ramon fight local jobber number 595, except the crowd doesn't understand that the match is predetermined.
Say hello to the bad guy.
However, when people like Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro face people who are actually well-versed in their topics or relatively well-trained in rhetoric, they will usually get demolished.
This is a dolphin fetus.
See Kirk debating college students at Cambridge or against Brianna Joy Gray.
Systemic racism. I could sit here and ask you, Charlie, do you know how many people came over in the transatlantic slave trade?
I could approximate about 1.8 million.
No, it's like 20 million.
Hold on,
Are you
20 million came as slaves?
20 million.
I'm making a simple observation, which is objectively true regardless. The women of the West are miserable, and we should tell them to stop freezing their eggs and start finding their partner earlier and have lots of babies.
If you actually care about women's happiness, then the solution is to structurally support them. That means universal childcare, shared legally enforceable parental leave, and in Nordic countries where women have high workforce participation and also some state support, they report higher life satisfaction than in more conservative countries, including America. So if your metric is...
Just you said it's bad.
I disagree, but thank you.
The 2 minutes that Kirk had facing Dean Withers on that Jubilee episode were rough enough that Kirk seemingly kept ducking Withers for the rest of that year. Dean was actually finally supposed to debate Kirk a few weeks after he was murdered, something that Dean took very, very hard.
Nobody deserves that. Not even Charlie Kirk.
When Kirk went to Cambridge in the UK and faced up against students who've actually put in significant effort and preparation, he was so clearly outmatched that his own channel comment section took the side of the woke feminists. So there it is. Charlie Kirk beaten by facts and logic in the marketplace of ideas. Feminism wins, the right loses, nothing else to worry about, right? Wrong, obviously. And this is because Kirk isn't in it for debates or the pursuit of truth or intellectual discourse or even winning the debate half the time. He's in it for the purpose I mentioned earlier of breaking containment, saying inflammatory things that he may or may not even be sincere about. I'm focusing on this because many people on the right and plenty of liberals like Ezra Klein believe certain things about Charlie and open dialogue that are just not true and fundamentally harmful. They think that people with opinions similar to Charlie Kirk must be openly defeated in the marketplace of ideas, and they take Kirk's political intentions of having dialogue and discussion at face value, saying Kirk did politics the right way, but this is so stupidly naive it makes my head hurt. Plus, it's just not based in reality. Here's Kirk, a man who didn't even finish college, insulting multiple highly successful black women with advanced degrees and high achievements, insinuating that their success is only a product of affirmative action based solely on them being given opportunities because they were black.
I may have been admitted on affirmative action, both in terms of being a woman and a woman of color, but I can declare that I did not graduate on affirmative action. This is my personal story.
You really have to wonder. In fact, you know, if we would have said 3 weeks ago, Blake, if we would have said that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called the racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously.
He insults their brain processing power and assumes that their job should have went to more qualified white men. He gives no actual argument for this, no material evidence to support this. It's just evident on face value from his perspective because of their race and this distortion of what affirmative action must be. The racism is so inherent that he's not even capable of understanding that what he's talking about is why affirmative action was created. When these women speak on benefiting from affirmative action, what they're pointing out is that before affirmative action, they would not have had the opportunity to reach the level of success they've reached, not because they lack the brain processing power, but because racists like Charlie Kirk assume that they couldn't and would never allow them the chance. And mind you, that still makes them rare because the most likely recipients of affirmative action have historically been white women. But in Kirk's mind, and the minds of most conservatives, racism only exists when people say slurs or openly admit it. And even then, we shouldn't talk about it too much. And none of this matters, again, because the point isn't to have a logical discussion where people learn something. It's to say something racist or sexist or homophobic out loud to his fan base and get away with it. Affirm the racist tendencies of his fans and build a coalition. I could talk hours if I wanted to about how wrong this statement of doing politics the right way is, as others have, but it doesn't make a difference because people like Kurt aren't here to be convinced. They're here to normalize their hateful rhetoric. Liberals and moderates watching, understand. If the ultimate goal is to reduce the damage that certain ideas cause, the best strategy is not to help them spread. Even if you think you're winning the optics in the moment, taking certain ideas out of the marketplace of ideas ends their ability to replicate. Yes, the dreaded deplatforming is our best weapon. There are drawbacks to it, yes, but understand that there's tons of research at this point that shows that no one really changes their mind from public debates. People don't change their mind just because they've been presented with better information on a topic. People will legit lie if they think it serves a greater communal good. So even if you have your cool Aaron Sorkin moment where you own the chuds, you're still not doing anything useful. It's team sports and entertainment, and our team will never win the actual major game going on with the strategy that we're going to convince them in the marketplace of ideas. And the right knows this. It's why they won't stop saying so much wild shit all the time. It's why they do not care if what they're saying is true or false, if it makes sense, if it doesn't, if it's an outright lie or exactly the opposite that someone else said. And I hate our modern news media for not just saying this to them. Whenever someone on the right just lies in their face, they say, "Is that true?" And then puts the microphone right back to them like they didn't just lie a fucking second ago. Like a perfect example is listening to Trump talk about the Epstein files on the campaign trail.
There's a moment where you had some hesitation about Epstein, releasing some of the documents on Epstein. Why the hesitation?
I don't think I'm not involved. I never went to his island.
And listening to him talk about the shit now.
Mr. President, what did Jeffrey Epstein mean in his emails when he said you knew about the girls? I know nothing about that. They would have announced that a long time ago.
Sir,
Yeah, Jennifer, go ahead. Go ahead.
In the file, Venezuela, sir. Why acting as if
Charlie Kirk himself spoke on the Epstein files all the time, but clearly was told behind the scenes to stop.
Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands. I've said plenty this last weekend.
And it was such a blatant reversal of his own opinions that surely some people should have woken up. But they did. Still no consequences, no change in behavior, no damage to their movement. We are living in a post-truth era. So why are we worried about having good faith debates with people who are obvious liars? One scary thing is the country has moved so far right in its general disposition, and the right-wing movement has been so effective in their rhetoric that they've managed to label Kirk as a moderate.
If you have unapologetic, ferocious anti-white racism, then young whites are going to find some very radical political positions. If you want young ladies to become more conservative, we should encourage and celebrate marriage. Get a mortgage, get married, and mate.
I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights.
And by the way, genetics matter. We should talk about genetics more. It's not racist to say that. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously.
He's saying these racist things and openly speaking on women not needing to be educated and just wanting to become mothers, defending gun violence in the name of liberty, etc. And it makes him a moderate because every once in a while, when an overt white supremacist comes to the stage, he shouts them down. But what you need to understand is that Republicans and their followers know it's all the same thing. You just can't say the quiet part out loud. Lee Atwater, the campaign manager for Ronald Reagan, said as much back in 1981 as they developed their culture war playbook.
You start out in 1954 by saying by 1968 you can't say that hurts your backfires.
But the truth is, Kirk was just skilled at hiding the racism inherent in his movement. Many members of Turning Point USA were exposed for having their own racist text chats. It's just something white people do when they're not around us, or even when they are around us, to be honest. Kirk was a modern update on all the overtly racist pundit this country has seen. However, I want to talk about the one that I think most right-wing figures are mimicking today, George Lincoln Rockwell. Now, some of you may find it offensive to compare George Rockwell, an overt neo-Nazi, to Kirk, allegedly a moderate, an overt neo-Nazi. However, you'll find him and Rockwell believe pretty much the same thing. Rockwell attacked MLK in the Civil Rights Bill. Charlie Kirk took the same exact position 60 years later. Both alleged that he was a communist, which we'll give him that one. MLK secretly based, made a whole video about it. It's fine. Rockwell believed in the Great Replacement Theory. Charlie Kirk believes in the Great Replacement Theory. Rockwell was anti-feminist and anti-gay, saying that he would allow gay men in his movement if they changed, but didn't believe in gay marriage.
I will say this. In my organization, I have men who were homosexuals. They were sucked into that filth, just like drunkards or dope fiends. And I have been able to rescue them. And I'm not a bit ashamed of that. I'll stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone on any day. The only thing I will not tolerate is a homosexual who is a homosexual.
Charlie Kirk says basically the same thing, always arguing about women being submissive, saying he's okay with gay people existing, but marriage is between a man and a woman.
Why can't marriage be allowed with two men or two women?
Allowed and what it is are two different things. Just strictly from what marriage has always been is the idea of two separate parts coming in a union to be able to have, hopefully, a lifelong partnership to raise kids, adopt kids, or have kids. It is the attraction of opposites. If you want to redefine marriage, that's fine, that's your contention, but I take a classical view of marriage.
Both were anti-immigration, both were college dropouts, both showed potential as provocateurs, which got the attention of rich benefactors. Harold Noel Aerosmith Jr. bankrolled Rockwell. Bill Montgomery saw similar potential in Kirk and helped him found Turning Point USA. Both were overtly anti-communist and anti-progressive. Both toured college campuses debating students and creating spectacle to bring attention to his cause. Both couched their politics in a false image of Christian faith based solely on whiteness. Both were even from the state of Illinois, with Rockwell being from Bloomington and Kirk being from Arlington Heights. It's the future home of the Bears, which that's so bad. And there's one more similarity I'm gonna save for later. However, for a lot of you, this might be your first time ever hearing of George Rockwell. Hell, I didn't know much about him till earlier this year, and shout out to Westside Tyler for making a similar comparison between him and Charlie Kirk in a video just a few months back. But despite the fact that Rockwell was a well-known figure in the 60s during the civil rights movement, often trailing Martin Luther King on his speaking engagements and marches, he's been erased from our history, and the reason is obvious. Rockwell made one mistake. He said the quiet part out loud a lot.
Commander George Lincoln Rockwell, you are head of the American Nazi Party?
Yes, sir.
How can you possibly justify leading an organization whose objectives are the liquidation of the Jews, the removal of the Negroes to Africa, and the turning of the United States into a fascist state?
Well, I don't know where you got those supposed objectives, but they're ridiculous. We have no such objectives, as you have said. We are not out to liquidate the Jews. We are out to liquidate communist traitors. Unfortunately, too many Jewish atheists, not religious Jews, but too many religious atheist Jews are mixed up in communism.
He was too honest about what the American right really was and what they wanted. He was too extreme, not in his rhetoric, much of which was popular then and is openly parroted by the American right now. No, his problem is that he openly called himself a Nazi. He did it at a time where Americans had spent years branding themselves as anti-Nazi, even though the Nazis modeled their genocide off of Jim Crow laws in America. They were still the bad guys to us then and still today. But his political platform was damn near identical to Trumpism.
Rockwell soon discovered that the well-educated and spirited Judith was nothing like the mental image of a wife, based on the demure and submissive Claire. He quickly eroded whatever relationship he had with the Altmans by blaming them for not training Judith for the proper, meaning docile and compliant role of a wife and mother, which was, in his view, the only appropriate station for a woman.
Submit to your husband, Taylor.
But unlike Kirk and so many figures on the right, he didn't play coy with plausible deniability. He didn't wink and nod with other white supremacists in the crowd. He didn't say stand back and stand by. He said literally white power. That's a book he wrote. He named one of his magazines the Stormtrooper, and one of his followers went on to write the Turner Diaries, the Bible of white supremacist fan fiction. So he is not mentioned in today's modern society and has been erased from history. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's interesting to consider that he himself has been erased, but not his rhetoric, especially since conservatives today have come to identify themselves with Nazis so much that making Nazis bad guys in movies and TV shows and video games is offensive to them. We just had a guy call himself a fascist on Jubilee to laughter and applause. But let's go back to that last similarity between Kirk and Rockwell I didn't speak on yet. It's in how they both died. The story right now is that Kirk was shot by a young white man named Tyler Robinson, sniped from a rooftop. Tyler Robinson has been branded as a leftist by a lot of conservative media due to some incredibly specious and circumstantial pieces of evidence that I'll talk more about later. I will add now that everything from his past life to his parents to his username on Steam and his hobbies indicates that he was your typical right-leaning young man from Utah. Meanwhile, Rockwell was also sniped from a roof by John Patler, a former member of his American Nazi Party who had a tumultuous tenure with the party due to not fitting into the Aryan aesthetic, for which he was eventually ousted by Rockwell for his Bolshevik tendencies. But what he really meant to say was that Patler was a closeted gay man. And I'm sorry if I can't not engage with the profound irony of these similarities and what they tell us about the hidden costs of movements like Rockwell's and Kirk's. The fact that Rockwell named his magazine Stormtroopers, explicitly insinuating the untimely death of his followers for the white cause, and the fact that it's that same belief in the expendability of his followers that led to his own death. And a similar thing can be said about Kirk, whose last words were literally him attempting to deflect the reality of spree shooters and similar acts of senseless gun violence that he's defended throughout his career, acts that, believe it or not, are far more likely to kill men who look like him than look like me. Because of this, Kirk ends up being just another victim of his own cult. The world Kirk helped build is the same one that killed him, and now they want to make him a martyr. Not a cautionary tale, not an opportunity to reflect, but a symbol to push their same destructive movement forward. And I can talk all day about how the rhetoric of the right and Kirk and Rockwell and whomever hurts me and those like me and those I care about, but we kind of already know that. Instead, let's talk about y'all. Let's talk about the other casualties of this forever culture war. Let's talk about the young white men dying like Charlie Kirk did. Part 3, look at me. I can't stop talking about the Joker, y'all. I'm sorry. I promise I won't be here long, but it's important. We got to get into the media analysis bag just a little bit for this section. The short of my infatuation with Joker as it pertains to this topic, for those of you who are new, there was once a time when the Joker was this silly, almost queer-coded agent of chaos that was a popular villain, but not this icon for disaffected, predominantly white men. When I was a kid, I saw Jack Nicholson as the Joker in the first Batman movie, and I thought, yeah, that's cool. But nobody wanted to be him. Same thing for the Joker in the reruns of the 1960s and the classic cartoon series in the 90s. But then in 2008, with The Dark Knight Returns, the gritty revamp of the Batman films, we got a new reimagining of the Joker as representing the aforementioned disaffected group of angry, predominantly white men. And I've talked in multiple videos now on how that image of the Joker is so iconic to these men and boys because it embodies a fantastical, ultra-violent response to an indifferent and cruel society that both causes their dysfunction and rejects them forward. And because of this, they lash out. And while the Joker's popularity has waned as the years have gone on, the sentiment behind his popularity has gone nowhere. The chaotic, evil desire to have revenge on society is just as salient in a lot of young, predominantly white men, Dax notwithstanding. The last Batman movie just took the same character motivation and put it on the Riddler this time instead of the Joker, just because it still is just as salient now as it has been probably for several generations. This nation is full of angry, nihilistic, and potentially violent young men trying to get anyone to pay attention. And I don't think people realize how integral that sentiment is to movements like the American Nazis or Turning Point USA. These photos that we see of these young men back years ago in Virginia, these are not white men who are well on track in life, who are finding their way easily through this world. No, these are rejects. We're seeing the type of men that if the Joker was real, they probably would have been some of his goons, or as Rockwell duly named, stormtroopers. Stormtrooper might sound like Tyler Robinson. The limited info on Robinson indicates that he was actually a young man of significant intelligence, having a 4.0 GPA, scoring 34 out of 36 in his college entrance exams, ranking him in the top 10% of testers. Yet he went to an unremarkable state school and dropped out after one semester to enter trade school. He was described as shy and quiet by many and was clearly deep into internet culture if the memes he put on the bullet casings and his choice of Halloween costumes are of any indication. And that's all we know, really. Over a month after this huge story, it's been radio silent on any new information and why he did this. Conservatives like to say the memes on his bullet casings indicate a left-wing political standing. However, the memes are also well-known memes in right-wing spaces meant to mock the left. The only other ostensibly left-leaning aspect of Robinson's life is the revelation that he was allegedly in a queer relationship with his roommate who was said to be trans, though there's minimal evidence of that as well. Mind you, Tyler Robinson being bisexual or pansexual or whatever wouldn't make him any less right-wing. Right-wing men are very much fans of queer sex and trans women. The log cabin Republicans are a thing. Gay Nazis were a thing, even amongst Rockwell's group. If you talk to trans women, they will tell you some of their biggest fans tend to be Republican men. There's also been some effort by those on the left to say that Robinson was actually far right and killed Kirk because he wasn't right-leaning enough. Many connect the memes to other far-right groups, specifically those led by Nick Fuentes, who is a constant and persistent critic of Charlie Kirk publicly. There's a lot of internet lore there that sounds plausible from a biased position, but there's little validity to support this assertion as well. Then, of course, we have the conspiracy theories that it was about the Epstein files or the Israel lobby, body doubles, and all kinds of stuff that comes from these moments. But at the end of the day, until we hear from Tyler directly, we don't have a strong understanding of why he allegedly did this. All that said, I have what I think is a compelling explanation, which is that Tyler Robinson was like a lot of young white men, except he's evolved somewhat. Tyler didn't technically commit an act of mass violence. Instead, he made a mass spectacle of violence. We'll explain this a bit by talking about spree shooters. There's been a lot of effort as of late by the state, law enforcement, and of course people like Charlie Kirk to reframe spree shootings and mass killings in ways that fail to isolate the disproportionately white male and right-wing nature of these mass violence incidents. All domestic terror acts of mass violence and spree shootings are disproportionately done by right-leaning straight white males. Kirk's incredibly ironic last words were him responding, counting or not counting gang violence, to a question about spree shootings. He was trying to insert a racist dog whistle to deflect from the point of the question, and he did this because engaging with the reality of what spree shootings are in America will require us to critically look at white people, white men specifically. The right has put a lot of effort in making spree shootings an issue of trans people somehow, even though most research indicates that trans people make up less than 1% of all spree shootings. And bringing up mass shootings in the context of street violence as if it's a black inner city gang thing hides the white male right-wing nature of the phenomenon even more. Gang violence and spree shootings have completely different circumstances and motivations and thus responses. But conflating those two is the point for men like Kirk. Again, the goal isn't the greater truth or understanding, it's breaking containment. This is not to say that all spree shootings that aren't a part of street violence are done by only white men. There's figures like Brian Nichols or Christopher Dorner as examples of black spree shooters, but aside from being relatively rare, it's also not hard to recognize the difference between someone like Christopher Dorner, who went on a killing spree over being fired from his job as a police officer, versus Scott Paul Bierle, who killed 6 women at a yoga studio because he was depressed and couldn't get a date. And again, there are some black spree shooters with similar motifs, but they pale in comparison to the amount of white ones. While both events are abhorrent, only one reminds me of the popularity of the Joker. Only one involves this vague desire for retribution on society, which tends to be the unique motivation for mostly right shooters and almost no one else. In the aftermath of Kirk's murder, the term nihilistic terrorism or nihilistic violent extremists popped up on people's radars.
Talk about nihilistic violent extremism, but haven't really set out to define what it is, and a lot of people don't know what it is. So what is it?
At its simplest terms, nihilistic violent extremism is a practical definition that allows authorities, specifically law enforcement and the FBI, to attribute acts of violence that are terroristic in nature but lack a singular ideological focus. It's individuals who are mobilized by maybe 3 or 4 ideologies, but none of them hold a primacy over that person's beliefs or why they took the violent actions they did. But nonetheless, they're seeking to exploit the weaknesses in society through violent means and hoping to see it collapse or at least degrade a little further.
Essentially saying, we don't really understand why he did this. But I think that's a lie. This ignores a very obvious factor in many of these events, the desire for attention.
So you think Batman's made Gotham a better place? Look at me.
Look at me! Going all the way back to the Columbine killers. When you read their writings and the writings of other spree shooters, you see a ton of patterns. And one of them is the desire for people to see what they're going to do, to witness them. Many leave behind manifestos. They send press kits to the media. They document their preparation, release videos of themselves. Some even live stream themselves in the midst of the act. They stylize themselves in ways to build an aesthetic, often paying tribute to other shooters or images of white spectacle violence. The Columbine shooters, for example, often got accused of being fans of The Matrix or that there was a connection there, but actually they were clearly referencing this scene from 1995's Basketball Diaries. These acts are intended to give them meaning in a world where they feel meaningless. And I would argue that even the killers who do seem more politically or specifically motivated still desire some sense of notoriety and attention. Dylan Roof was an overt white supremacist, and his killing, like many right-wing terrorists, was explicitly for the goal of starting a race war through which so many people, black and white, would have died, again inspired by the Turner Diaries, another part of Rockwell's legacy. Roof aggrandized himself as the only person resolute enough to do what had to be done for white people and wrote in his diary in jail how he hated that people had the nerve to question exactly why he was doing what he was doing, to question his mental wellness or say he had a drug problem. He didn't want any of those normal excuses y'all be giving to these white boys. He was adamant, and he's been very clear since then, that he has no sorrow for the lives that he took. You don't do this much because you're indifferent to being known and understood. No. You want to be known and understood. You want your words and actions to be influential and mean something. And I know this because law enforcement knows this. Since probably the mid-2010s, when it became clear that mass shootings were just going to be a thing we had to deal with here in America, the media and authorities began to give less attention and energy to spreading the names and faces of the perpetrators of these crimes. It used to be that committing a spree shooting of some sort would get your face all over the news for weeks or months. You get tons of examination of your life and your background and your parents and your friends and all this stuff, academic papers, interviews in prison, whole documentaries, etc. Now you're lucky if your incident stays in the news cycle for more than 48 hours, and the media will rarely say your name on TV. But what if you kill or attempt to kill someone famous? Then they can't ignore you. Literally the same day Charlie Kirk was killed, there was a spree shooter by a kid obsessed with Hitler and Nazis in a whole other state. But he didn't kill Charlie Kirk, so none of us remember this. Consider how much more famous Matthew Crooks would have been if he had actually killed Donald Trump. Further, look at his very similar background to Robinson. Quiet kid, highly intelligent, highly online, all the usual features, but at some point Crooks knew that he wanted to do some type of spectacle act of violence, and he researched spree shooting and other things extensively before deciding to kill Donald Trump. But he failed, and instead his attempt became fuel for Trump's presidential campaign, and his story has been mostly pushed to the side. But understand, targeting famous public figures for infamy isn't a new thing, and it's probably going to make a strong comeback because this is what disaffected, mostly white men have been doing for years. When you look at Ronald Reagan or Bjork or the murder of John Lennon, they all have the same similarities. My goal in bringing up spree shootings is to beg an obvious question. Why is this something that Americans have just allowed to happen here in America? No other country in the world, even countries with plenty of guns like Canada, has as many acts of senseless violence. But more interestingly, why do we not engage with the uniquely white nature of this phenomenon? Not just the fact that the shooters are predominantly white, but also the fact that the victims are predominantly white. Of all the inherent paradoxes in the modern American right wing, none to me are more striking than the fact that 20 white kids dying at an elementary school or a high school or an all-white church or an all-white country music concert would bear minimal energy or attention in the alleged pro-life conservative agenda. Instead of outrage and self-reflection, the right has only doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down, with Kirk being one of the main people defending guns and gun culture and distracting from any real efforts to look inward. Him being murdered in a similar act in the middle of dodging questions on the nature of these acts is so ironic that it feels like something from a movie. Charlie Kirk's murder is yet another cry for attention from white men who are suffering under late-stage capitalism and alienation. But at this point, it's clear that the excesses of white death in this country is not a glitch, it's a feature. It's the entire point. And that's why Kirk has to be celebrated and elevated to such a high level, because he was a true believer turned public martyr. And other white men like him will be lucky to share his fate. But the reality is, most of the other deaths in the name of this cult don't have nearly the same level of exaltation.
Obviously, that's not what either of us are saying.
But what do you think is the cause of it? Like, what do you think is the reason why more men aren't succeeding and getting college degrees and more men aren't going out and making as much money in their 20s?
I think that the current environment does not necessarily lend itself to the disposition that men have got. So they're less conscientious than women from a personality standpoint on average. That means that it's really difficult, comparatively on average, for you to be able to remind yourself that you need to do the sort of homework. Men are more predisposed to addiction, they're more predisposed to using recreational drugs, they're more predisposed to being in jail, to all of the sort of gang stuff that people get drawn into. It's just more likely for guys. There are more routes that men can be pulled away.
People on the right say pretty consistently that the left offers no answers to young men. The phrase is often, the left has failed men. And I get why they say this. It's stupid, but I get what they're trying to get at. They're getting at the fact that the left offers men no easy answers for the specific things they believe are causing them problems. Instead, the left, because we're talking about a very nebulous thing, right, offers young men a relatively unproven and risky way of reimagining themselves as men, which is in many ways antithetical to the way they have been taught to think a man should be. They are literally telling them the thing that they're actually pursuing is the problem in the first place. So of course, how could that be an easy or viable answer from that particular standpoint? Mind you, there's no shortage of left-leaning men that exhibit the traits we often associate with traditional masculinity and manhood, whether it be physical prowess, desirability, wealth, being a solid father figure or provider, and in plenty of cases, being a misogynist or a patriarch. None of these things are unique to the right. Further, if you look at a lot of modern right-wing male figures, they come up pretty fucking short in their performance of masculinity, whether it be Ben Shapiro's clear low T count or the fact that many right-wing men like Kanye West or Steven Crowder can't keep their women or don't take care of their kids. But the right has the advantage in branding, not in truth. And so because they can frame their false images of masculinity as the appropriate ones, it's an uphill battle for anyone outside of that. The right's image of masculinity is based in dominance and the left's isn't. To the right, as long as a man aspires to or exhibits traits of dominance, then he's okay in their eyes. And while, again, these problems do exist with men on the left, we're not branding ourselves as such, and that limits our reach. Conversely, the right tells young men and boys that they can be a dominant alpha male as long as they follow them on Instagram and buy their vitamins and do this workout plan, as well as this 11-step course to becoming a millionaire before the age of 30. And none of it works, of course. The irony, the immense irony of the left has failed men is that the right has always failed men. The right has been in control of what men say they're trying to be for generations. And why are we where we are today, if not for the false things they've been selling y'all?
Algorithmically generated content on social media contributes to and profits from young men's growing social isolation, boredom, and ignorance, with the deepest pocketed firms on the planet trying to convince young men that they can have a reasonable facsimile of life on a screen. Many grow up without acquiring the skills to build social capital or create wealth. The statistics are insane. Like 45% of men 18 to 25 have never approached a woman in person.
But you could largely describe America right now as a giant bet on AI. 10 companies have driven all the growth in GDP, are responsible for 77% of the earnings growth. Our economy literally rests on 10 companies now, often referred to as the Magnificent 10. And they do several things, but quite frankly, they're in the business of enragement, polarization, and then sequestering young people from all other activities. Now, of trying to establish a romantic partnership when you have literally lifelike synthetic porn. So what are we doing? I think we have our economy is attached to one objective, and that is to evolve a new species of asocial, asexual males. Unintentionally, we have an economic interest, right now I would argue, in planning our own extinction.
It's not controversial to say that modern men are in a state of crisis, but that crisis is very much man-made. And by man-made, I mean capitalism, of course. I hear Tucker Carlson's worried about T levels, and he's right. There's substantial evidence that men have less testosterone today than they did a generation ago. Is it due to cultural degeneration or trans women, or the fact that corporations have been allowed to feed us microplastics for most of the last 50 years? Men are getting married less and are less likely to head a household. Is this because feminism has made women more masculine, or because neoliberalism has made it impossible to support a family on a normal job? Is it because capitalism incentivizes employers to pay people less and less to work them more and more, and the right constantly fights against raising the taxes on the wealthy who are in control of that equation? Let alone raising the minimum wage or paying for healthcare, maternity leave. Who would want to get married under any circumstances when it's two people just struggling together? Everything about modern men and modern society is a direct reflection of the failures of modern capitalism, but the right refuses to acknowledge this to the detriment of its own followers. The most damning statistic of the dysfunction amongst white men specifically can be found in the suicide rate. While so many white supremacists like to talk about 1350, the distorted data point that says African Americans make up 13% of the population and 50% of the crime, which is a willful misrepresentation of FBI data that we all should know by now. I've talked about it before. I'm not getting back into it. But what about 3070? Y'all ever hear that one? That represents the percentage of white men in this country and the percentage of suicides that they represent. Yes, white men are 30% of the population and represent a whopping 70% of suicides in America. Yet somehow it's the left who is failing men. And this is on top of all the ugly things I talked about in the last section, like spree shooters, or how about acts of family annihilation where white men wake up one day and decide to murder their entire family, their wife and their kids because they lost their job or dealing with depression, both of which may or may not also end in suicide. Do I even want to get into pornography addiction? Pornography consumption is more prominent and tends to be more deviant in red states. You southern red states love your femboys and your porn. And pornography addiction, on occasion, spirals out into white men committing spree shootings. If any other group in this country had these types of disproportionate negative health outcomes, it will be all over every news space on a regular basis with explicit detail. They would call it the white male spree shooter problem and not the male loneliness crisis, because the reality is it's the white male loneliness crisis. I recently watched a video by CoffeeZilla where he talks about the proliferation of gambling in our daily society. Shout out to him for the video as a whole, but I couldn't help be frustrated that he didn't touch on who the targets of this type of stuff is, which is young white men scared about their position in society, hoping that something as simple and easy and low effort as gambling can pull them out of a situation where they might be at the bottom of the economic reality and push them to the top. And yes, you do have people like Kevin Hart, Drake, even Drewski and Joe Budden appear in some of these gambling commercials, which, by the way, shout out to Kai Cenat for being one of the few to turn like these multi-million dollar gambling company deals. He turned one down. So yes, black figures are a part of the promotion of these sites, but this is just due diligence on the part of these gambling companies to hit every corner of men they can think of. The real targets are young white men looking to feel like winners to grasp an opportunity. And this works because they know how desperate people are, how big the gulf between the haves and the have-nots is growing, and how no amount of talent or hard work creates a solid path to a viable, successful life in this country anymore. Once again, your grandparents killed the New Deal in the 1960s so that black people couldn't live too close to you. And mind you, problem gambling has a higher suicide rate than any other form of addiction. And people like Joe Rogan promote it regularly in between complaining about the masculinity crisis to his predominantly white male audience, all for the love of money, which he doesn't need. He got it from Saudi Arabia. And again, this is not to say that black and other men don't suffer from these issues, that the suicide rate for men in general is abnormally high over the last 40 years. But considering all the other ways in which black people tend to lead in negative health outcome categories, you got to think that white men are working extra hard to outdo structural racism to take the lead here, all while simultaneously escaping the scrutiny and disrespect that usually comes with it. But here's the thing, this particular social problem is just as influenced by structural issues with white men as social problems affecting black men and black people in general and everyone else. It's just a different function of the same exact structure. Often you'll see right-wing men in our media focus directly or tangentially discuss the male loneliness epidemic. We have Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Rogan, etc. And historically, this is relevant as the men's rights movement from the 70s was born out of men attempting to come together to address the social issues that men face. However, the original men's rights movement was a progressive and almost feminist movement that was eventually co-opted by right-wing chauvinistic thinking. And that's exactly where the modern manosphere exists currently. And right now, we're just seeing history repeating itself. Many white men, white male-oriented spaces have attempted to lay the blame for these issues at the aspects of modern society. They blame women, immigrants, gay people, etc. for promoting degeneracy. And somehow that is causing like factories to shut down in their Midwestern towns, even though they can't quite connect the dots there for you. They don't have to, because that's what you kind of want to believe. And they want you to believe this because if you don't, then you might accidentally engage with structures of patriarchy and capitalism that have been used to kill as many opportunities for normal white men as they have for anyone else. And mind you, this is why people like Kirk argue against women being independent and getting educated. The whole trad wife thing that has become popular in the last couple of years is a marketing ploy to convince women that they were better off in the 1950s when they couldn't get a divorce.
The 3 M's make you a better citizen and more conservative, which of course is mortgage, marriage, and mating.
In fact, ending no-fault divorce is literally something many right-wingers want to do right now. They want women to not have autonomy, often using the fact that women are so unhappy now as evidence of the failure of feminism, which is ironic because it actually just proves the left's point about everything. One thing that never gets brought up when we talk about the male loneliness epidemic, because it takes the focus away from explicitly men is the fact that while the suicide rate for men is abnormally high and has been for decades now, women are actually more likely to attempt suicide than men. They're not doing any better under the current situation. And in another sick twist, the only reason why their suicide rate isn't higher is because of the methods women tend to choose for killing themselves versus men. To be blunt, men are more likely to use guns in attempting suicide, which is much more lethal than the methods women tend to use, such as attempting to overdose on pills. Thus, women are more likely to survive, creating opportunities for future intervention. And white men are more likely to own firearms, often as a manifestation of achieving masculine status and or the irrational fear that black people or immigrants or terrorists or wherever else are dangerous to them, so they want to carry these guns around in case they have to become John Rambo one day. And ironically, that just ends up making it easier for them to kill themselves when things don't go well for them. A paper published in the National Institute of Health said the following.
Themes of white male anxiety are common in recent social science research. For example, Carlson shows that white male anxiety surrounding perceived threats to their dominant status explains high rates of gun ownership among whites. Kimmel also demonstrates that the pressure to be economically successful, particularly in times of economic uncertainty, is a major source of distress among white men. Indeed, the narrative of the erosion of the authority of white men and perceived status threats is evident in the formation of the Tea Party movement and the rise of men's rights groups. Research on health and well-being also supports these notions. Case and Deaton show that suicide rates among white males have increased, which they speculate have been fueled by hopelessness. In response to this study, Phillips hypothesized that white men may have experienced greater increases in suicide because they were socialized to believe that they would experience upward social mobility and economic prosperity in a way that racial minority men were not. In other words, these men had further to fall.
This excerpt mentions Michael Kimmel and his concept of aggrieved entitlement. And while Kimmel has for various reasons fallen out of favor in gender studies, I don't think anyone has a better framework for examining the uniqueness of this specific social ill for white men specifically. Kimmel states the following in a paper titled Suicide by Mass Murder.
Feeling aggrieved, wronged by the world, these are typical adolescent feelings, common to many boys and girls. What transforms the aggrieved into mass murderers is also a sense of entitlement, a sense of using violence against others, making others hurt as you, yourself, might hurt. Aggrieved entitlement inspires revenge against those who have wronged you. It is compensation for humiliation. Humiliation is emasculation. Humiliate someone and you take away his manhood. For many men, humiliation must be avenged or you cease to be a man. Aggrieved entitlement is a gendered emotion, a fusion of that humiliating loss of manhood and the moral obligation and entitlement to get it back.
These men have been told all their lives that they should align themselves with these structures and traditions, that masculinity should be a certain way, and it's their job to ensure that if they abide by certain rules and traditions, that they will be rewarded. And in that process, they become foot soldiers or maybe even stormtroopers for these structures. And being a soldier is costly, and the cost is their happiness, well-being, and possibly their lives. And it's all to protect the system that does not have their best interest in mind. And more, so many of these men are recognizing that the structure is not holding up its end of the bargain, and they're looking around at their peers slowly dying, but instead of recognizing the system as the problem, they listen to the system explain to them that the real problem is trans middle schoolers playing soccer. And for a long time, it was really hard for me to make sense of that. How so many of these men can fall for such obvious misdirection, and why so few recognize the real problem. But then as I've studied the manosphere and the right wing over and over, I realized that it's not because it makes sense, but because it makes community. It's because the cohesive identity of white men is literally worth dying for from their perspective. The real challenge that the left has in attracting men is the fact that it means deconstructing this ideological framework and reconstructing the concept of community and kinship for a lot of white men that, let's be honest, a lot of us don't want to be around. It's why so many white men on the left hold on to those same frameworks when they get here, allowing many problems to repeat themselves. And any white man on the left that tells you otherwise is not to be trusted. I still get emails from fans of insert white leftist guy here saying, "Why are you so mean about white guys?" I can't with y'all. It's that sense of belonging and community that creates a barrier, and understanding that, it makes sense how so much of our daily lives have been atomized to reduce community, because it makes it so the only community left for many of these white men are these reactionary right-wing spaces. I remember when I was a teen that rock and metal were much more prominent parts of white male culture. There were much more popular genres of music that were intrinsically anti-establishment, anti-corporate, and unsurprisingly, within all that convergence of media companies, you saw them purposefully begin to exclude those types of very much white-oriented music in favor of music that was more easily commodifiable. Deja Sade does a great analysis on how Eminem, believe it or not, was probably the last true anti-establishment white megastar figure holding off the full control of MAGA for white minds today. Because today, most images of viable white masculinity that are popular are very much right-wing, very much corporately sponsored, happy dog, happy dad, whatever the beer company is, all these podcasts. It's not just Charlie Kirk, it's Theo Vaughn, it's Aiden Ross, it's Brilliant Idiots, or whatever dude's name is that be hanging with Charlemagne. And this is why Trump went to all of those podcasts, kind of just casually saying whatever the fuck he wanted with no pushback. And now all of them are like, I can't believe he didn't release the Epstein files. We were tricked. You fucking idiots. You weren't tricked, you're willfully being stupid. It may seem like I'm being flippant here, but I genuinely just feel sad. Getting back to media analysis for a second, I can't not think of the War Boys from the Mad Max movies. I remember watching Fury Road back in 2015, recognizing that it was a brave decision to not just have these foot soldiers in the movie be nameless peons to be killed in the background. Instead, the War Boys were this great metaphor for what's happening to boys in our world right now. We watch as one of them goes through a metamorphosis to find meaning in a seemingly meaningless life, greatly through developing a new community apart from its cult of origin. I found a quote from the Mad Max fan wiki that is sourced to George Miller, though I couldn't verify this, still is too perfect to leave out here.
These war boys have no choice. They're culturally impoverished. There's no books, there's no internet, there's no theaters, no radio, no music. All they have are the detritus of the past, and they refashion it so a steering wheel becomes a religious artifact. They do the sign of the V8, the engine they've scarified onto their bodies, because an engine is much more permanent than a human body. They chrome their teeth, because chrome is such a rare thing. So like all cults, this is another cult invented by Immortan Joe in order to get people to die on his behalf.
What's so effective about them as a metaphor is how these boys reinforce each other. They're a community before anything. They actively have some touching and endearing moments of brotherhood within their cult, which is something that needs to be recognized. It's why it works. But at the end of the day, regardless of those minor positive moments, this is a closed circle. They're not allowed out and not allowed to see the world beyond their existence, lest what happens to Nux, the character in the first Mad Max, happens to more of them. And this is exactly what happens in a lot of these male-oriented right-wing spaces. These boys and young men spend countless hours in group chats, Reddit pages, and the comment sections of their favorite creators, creating culture around the cult, reinforcing their behavior and paradoxically toxifying each other where it would be incredibly hard for them to ever find community elsewhere. And the result is death. Socially, if they're lucky, but eternally for more than we like to think about. And in the meantime, the real life Immortan Joe and his various cronies enrich themselves through their sacrifices. Don't look up how much money Trump has made in the variety of crypto scams and contracts in just the first year of his presidency, all off the backs of these same white men who voted for him, whose lives have not changed at all. The rise in the suicide rate in America over the last 20 plus years is almost exclusively driven by white men, often due to depression, addiction, despair, and a loss of hope, all while the right has controlled this country for most of the last 50 plus years and has pointed to us and everyone else as a minority, saying somehow it's our fault. And if you include the political reigns of Clinton and Obama and Biden as being right-wing, which you should, do some Googles, it's all pretty much right-wing all the time for a generation, for at least my entire life. But even not counting them, right now, Republicans have the Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court, all three branches of the government, and what have they done for y'all? Aside from fucking up us. What has changed? In fact, they're actively trying to make y'all less healthy and less wealthy as we speak, as the president spends $300 million to redecorate the White House and invites tech billionaires over to hang out and plan future contracts for shit that will only make our lives worse. But as others have noted, cruelty is the point. If y'all know I'm suffering, then you're getting exactly what you want. I guess these right-wing men, these white right-wing men, haven't discovered some newfound value in their lives in the process, but they're seeing the inherent cruelty of right-wing ideology come to prominence. Abortion is gone. Affirmative action is gone. Trans rights are gone. Immigrants are being hunted in the streets. Genocide is still happening, and even more is on the horizon, but nothing for addiction, nothing for mental health. You're still getting gambling commercials probably in between watching this video. Nothing to improve that is on the American agenda. The big beautiful bill made significant cuts to benefits and made it so you can't even challenge AI doing whatever the fuck AI is about to do to us in the next 10 years. Meanwhile, Gen Z, the generation most targeted by Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, is committing suicide at a higher rate than previous generations. This is the agenda people were mourning when they say Charlie Kirk was a good guy, as his friends strip them of rights, money, humanity, and generally make them less healthy and less safe. As long as this video is, and as much as I've already said, I still don't think I have adequate words to make sense of that. So instead, I'll actually try to end with a little hope. An important thing to remember about all of this is that no fascist regime exists forever. And while fascism is here in this country right now, most Americans are not on board, even those who are politically uninclined, even those who are moderately right-leaning. In 2 terms, Trump has never been a popular president. He's consistently polled under 45%, and on average, he's the least popular president since the 1940s. He did not win by a landslide in 2024, nor did he win by a landslide in 2016. In fact, he's pulled in pretty much the same percentage of votes each time. If you manage to get off social media and stop watching entertainment news, you'll find that most people, even most white people, are not on board with this cult. They're not in it. Even in rural areas that have been greatly targeted by this cult, there are tons of people who understand what is happening and are resisting in ways that they can. Moreover, there are plenty of regular people who are amenable to just causes that just need to be built with, engaged with, talked to, and most importantly, organized. The reality is that the right is actually becoming more desperate because although they've been winning for so long, the fact that I'm even here making this video to as big an audience as I will get is an example of how things are changing. If they were truly so powerful, they wouldn't be working so hard to prove it. So those of us who are in spaces we can work to reach these people, specifically those of you who are whites that are maybe instead of moving to a gentrified area in the inner city, take your ass back to the rural spots where you came from and get shit percolating over there. I'm not going. I don't have the capacity. I've tried. It doesn't work. But you might be able to do better than I can. And I don't say this flippantly, them motherfuckers need help. They need you. We have to recognize that the vast majority of the men that I've been targeting in this video are victims in this equation. Most of them groomed from a young age to see the world in a very specific way that ends exactly where we know it ends, for them to be fuel for the machine. So they die and the beat goes on. And all other bullshit aside, as a person who's done work in rural areas, who's been a teacher to young white men in the suburbs, or just as a fucking human recognizing that meaningless devotion to death in the name of forces that don't care about you is a sad thing, it's hard not to have empathy for what's happening to these men, and that almost goes to Charlie Kirk, who was only 18 when he was found and groomed by his right-wing ultra-rich backers to be a stormtrooper in their war. They paid him handsomely to be on the front lines, of course. But I'd like to think that at 18, nothing is set in stone for how you view the world. Who knows who he could have been without this structure in place. But instead, he was making jokes about genocide and running cover for pedophiles at the cost of his humanity and eventually his life. But out of respect for Charlie's memory, I'm going to do what Charlie would do and just say, damn, that's too bad. It's too bad what happened to you, bro. I don't know what to tell you. I have sympathy for you, but that's not my problem. Personal responsibility and all of that. See, to recognize the sadness of a man dying like that, leaving his wife and children behind at such a young age, to feel something about the tragedy, I'd have to put myself in his shoes. I need empathy. And
Empathy is a made-up New Age term that it does a lot of damage, but it is very effective when it comes to politics. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy. That's a separate topic for a different time.
First things first, man. With the worst, I'll be sticking pins in your head like a left and earth. Now attack any nigga who's slack in his back. Come fully back with the fat chip stack. Shame on you when two steps go through. Old dirty bastard, straight from the Brooklyn Zoo. And I'll be damned if I let any man come to my center. You enter the winter. Straight up and down, that shit is back jam. You can't slam. Let me get fooled on the man. Old dirty bastard, dirty and sick, and ain't showing you the holdin' with the night of the creek. Niggas be rollin' with a stash, ain't saying yes. What? My sound like some other way. Crying out loud, my style is wild, so book me. Not long, it's how long it this rock took me. Ejected, styles of my lethal weapon. My pen, the rocks from here, torn again. It's more again. Catch like a psycho flashback, I love gas. Rappers are good, you ain't bucks back. I was sitting on tight, stay, stand. And where my lamps, my stomping grounds, I give a order to my people across the water. To go stack up points all around the border. And even more, I can shoot and stalk and shoot off. Living the life of my basketball. Point blank as I kick and swim in. There it is, special pros and there it goes.
I live like a capitalist every single day, Shank.